I'd like to start by acknowledging how much I owe to IIT. It's been a formative kind of influence in my life, and not a day passes when I don't think about what I derived from IIT, now 55 years later after I graduated. Just to go back in my mind's eye, if I think of 1962, June of 1962, I think, when I arrived on campus, I had come there earlier for the interviews. I think it was in April, but it was very, very different from today. There were very few buildings. There was the building sciences block, which I think still exists. And that was pretty much it actually when I arrived. And we had two hostels. Narmada was being built where I stayed, and Krishna and Kaveri were already there. But Narmada was being plastered as we walked in June of 1962. And there were very few trees. It was just open land for the most part. There were trees in some parts more towards the gate. There were trees, but in the area where the hostels are, there was basically hardly any vegetation, because I believe they were all agricultural land or just barren land. And on the other side is Velachery, and far in the distance was Taramani. And that was all we could see. And there's all open space all around us. So it is like nothing. And our routine was we went to class for 7 hours every day, Monday to Friday, and 4 hours on Saturday. 7:30 to 11:30, I think 1 to 4. Every day, day in and day out, for the full 5 years. Of course, not that I attended class every day, but that's another matter. But that was the official thing. And by the way, they were very strict about attendance rules. So you had to have minimum 85%. And if you didn't get 85%, you would fail the year. You would have to repeat the year. It was quite strict. So that was pretty scary. That is the one we all wanted to avoid. So, and we had, we were all very young. We were only 16 in those days. The minimum age was 16. I think they calculated 16 on October 1. I know my brother-in-law could not go to IIT because he was born in October. My brother just made it. My brother, who's also, I think, being interviewed in this series, he went there. So anyway, life was, very simple in those days. There was nothing. And I think many of the buildings we see were built while we were there. The humanities block, the mechanical sciences, electrical sciences, the workshops were there, actually, I should point out. The workshops were already there. And various buildings. In fact, today when I come to the campus, I find it hard to recognize some of the buildings because all of them are new for me. And Gajendra Circle was built, which is, of course, a big icon of the campus, was built when we were there. So it became, I think, over time, the major landmark of the campus. And so we studied, so many subjects in those days. I believe in my third year, we had a 5-year program in those days. The third year, I had 13 subjects. 13 subjects going on throughout the year. Can you imagine keeping track of the materials for 13 subjects? And I must say that my actual learning in the classroom sense was not very good. I mean, there's so much material crammed into our heads. And I must say, since I've moved out of engineering, I don't remember that much of engineering. When I go to my classmates' groups, I know many of them continued in engineering. I left engineering almost immediately. So after IIT, I went to the IIM at Ahmedabad, worked briefly in the Tata Administrative Service, and then went on for my PhD at MIT, PhD in Finance and Economics. And I have been a professor ever since I graduated with my PhD in 1974. And I still continue to work, although I'm going to turn 75 this year. I'm still a professor and a chaired professor. And I've been a chaired professor for 30 odd years. So I've been for a long time. And I've been at only one university, New York University, at the Stern School of Business, pretty much throughout my career. Although I've been a visiting professor in so many universities the University of Manchester, University of Cambridge, INSEAD, ESSEC, the University of Constance, the University of Frankfurt, then Louis in Italy, Singapore, the Singapore Management University, National University of Singapore. In China, I'm also, even now, I'm a professor at NYU Shanghai. In Melbourne, I've been a professor in so many places. But my home is and has been always in New York, at New York University. That is my home. Unlike a lot of my younger colleagues who keep moving, I never moved. I never wanted to move. In fact, I was also visiting professor, I forgot to mention, at IIT in 1984. And I was a professor in IIM Ahmedabad, also my other alma mater, in 1976, 78. So my life as an academic has been very rich. Since I'm in an applied field, I take the opportunity to do a lot of consulting work. I've consulted with major banks around the world, including the largest banks in the world, from JP Morgan to Citibank to Credit Suisse and Swiss Bank Corporation, Deutsche Bank. I've also consulted with many industrial companies. I've served on many boards in India. I've served on the boards of Infosys, and I've served on the board of ICICI Limited. In fact, I'm ICICI Bank Limited. I'm still on the board of ICICI Ventures, which is a subsidiary of ICICI Bank. And I have been also in several government committees. I'm still on the board of an RBI committee. I've served on SEBI committees, and I've advised the finance ministry. I've been really quite active in India, I would say, in for the last 30-40 years, 35 years. And my life has been quite rich. I was married to the same woman for 51 years, 50, little over 50 years. Unfortunately, he passed away recently from COVID. But I am continuing. I'm continuing with my active professional life. And I am also on the board of the IIT Madras Foundation. I'm trying to give back something to the institution that nurtured me when I was young. And I'm very, very pleased to see the good work being done by the IIT Madras Foundation. And I'm very, very glad to be part of it. So that's my story in brief. So when I was in IIT, as I mentioned already, my heart was not in engineering. I don't know why, because I come from a long line of engineers. My great-grandfather was an engineer, one of the earliest. My great-grandfather graduated from what is today Guindy Engineering College. In those days, College of Engineering used to be in Chepauk. And he graduated in 1868, my great-grandfather. My grandfather was also an engineer. He graduated from engineering college, same engineering college, in 1920. And I graduated, my father was not actually qualified as an engineer, but he became an engineer. And he was in the field of chemical engineering for many, many years. And of course, I have an engineering degree. Both my children have engineering degrees from MIT. I learned a lot from my classmates and just the atmosphere of IIT provide me. I spent a lot of time in the library, and of course I was active. I was the editor of the Campus Times and many other things. And I was very active in quizzes and so on and so forth. But I enjoyed my life in IIT campus, I have to say. I have no regrets about having gone to IIT. But I would say that I was not an engineer at heart. So I said, I am looking for something else. And this new opportunity, IIMs were just opening, the oldest IIMs were just opening up. By the way, I was in the 4th batch of IIT Madras and the 4th batch of IIM Ahmedabad. I went to IIM, and for the first time, I found that I liked it. I liked what I was studying, and I actually performed extremely well. I was a gold medalist. And then I said, I want to be a professor. I just decided. That was not what most of my class, in fact, I was the only one in my class who wanted to do that. And I went and I worked for a year just to understand what business is all about. I confirmed my earlier hunch that I would not like to be full-time in the world of business and industry. So I went off to MIT and did my PhD. By luck, pure luck, because I had many other schools I applied to, I got in everywhere. But MIT gave me the greatest opportunity. I didn't know this before I went there. It was the best place to get a PhD in finance and economics in the early 70s. I mean, today I think you could argue there are other places also, but then it was number one, and without a doubt, number one. And so I'm very, very lucky that I landed in the right place at the right time. And I've had a fantastic academic career. I enjoyed every minute of it. And I'm still active. That is testimony. Not many people can say they're writing papers at the age of 75 and after 40 of or more than 50 years in the academic business. I'm still writing papers. I'm actively collaborating. In fact, just before the call, I was talking to some co-authors. So my life is extremely active. In spite of my recent loss, I'm still trying to focus and continue with my life. I would say that sort of IIT taught me mathematical reasoning, which I still use. And that was, although the actual formal mathematical education that I received in IIT, I was not very happy with that because I didn't get the answers to the basic questions. And I got some very good mathematical courses, surprisingly. And that really made me think much better and much more clearly. And of course, my MIT PhD gave me fantastic way of thinking about economics and finance in mathematical terms. And that has served me very, very well. So I would say I'm interested in a lot of things. I'm interested in literature. I'm interested in history. In fact, I just recently finished an article which was published in Wire, The Wire in India. It's a story of my grandfather, who was an inventor, who was an engineer, inventor. And I just published it actually 10 days ago. So, yeah, so I'm interested definitely in history. I'm curious about history. And I mean, right now, I'm interested quite a bit in public policy. I try to apply my research to questions. For instance, I have written several papers on the COVID and its economic impact in the last 1 year. I've published them actually, they've been published. And I'm sort of thinking about if you ask me what appeals to me most, Lata, what appeals to me most is looking at the world around me, seeing what are the issues and problems in the world, and seeing if I can apply my background in economics and finance to solve some of those real world problems. That's what appeals to me. So when I serve on the Reserve Bank's Financial Markets Committee, I find that I can use not just my academic knowledge, but my knowledge from my experience in global markets and advise the Reserve Bank, because I bring a different perspective compared to those who live and work in India. So my passion is my subject of finance, financial economics, and how to apply it, not just sit and write papers. I write papers, but I won't apply it. That's my interest and also my strength, I would argue. Yeah. That's a very good question. In fact, that is what appeals to me about being a professor. To have contact with my students. I would say more than teaching, I consider myself a mentor. So teaching is a part of that mentoring relationship. So I've helped with their overall development. So my PhD students become part of my family. My wife and I always, all my PhD students, they came to my house, they had meals with us, they met my family. In fact, they're part of my family. And many of them actually regard themselves as my family members. They don't regard themselves as the formal relationship. So it's more like the guru Sishya relationship of the Indian tradition, right? So it's a sort of unconditional thing. It's not just, oh, I teach you this course and then I'm gone. No, it's like I'm with you throughout my life. In fact, many of even my first PhD student, who's in fact, he's only a little bit younger than me. He's in contact with me. And my latest PhD student, I spoke to him also just a little while ago. He's just started his first job. He's Chinese. He's teaching in Shanghai, and we are discussing some paper we are presenting actually tonight at a conference in China. He's presenting our paper in China, and we were discussing some things about the paper. You know, so my relationship with my students is very, very close. Now, coming back to my IIT days, that's one of the things that I did not like about IIT, that the relationship between the faculty and the students was very, very kind of remote. And I'm sorry to say, it is still so. But I went to, I think, one or two professors' houses in 5 years. One was a German professor by the name of Dr. Professor Heitland. And he invited all of us because we were in his lab. In IIM, it became better. And in fact, when I went back to teach at IIM, all my students we invited home for a meal over time, in batches of 10, 15. And my wife would cook huge meals. And even today, my students from IIM days, they come and they're in contact. They send me emails and so on. We're talking about 45 years ago, and they're still in contact. So I really enjoy that. For me, teaching is a complete relationship. It's not just doing something in class, giving some quizzes and exams, and that's it, and you forget about it. No, it's kind of more or less something that's a continuing relationship. And I'm fortunate that many of the students are in contact with me. I run an undergraduate research program, which is kind of unique in business schools. I think we were the first, and now others are copying it. And I'm so proud that we produced 400 undergraduate theses of excellent quality. And that has been a very, very satisfying experience. So I really enjoy not just the classroom experience, that's only a small part of it, but the overall relationship with my students. Actually, I work with, right now, I think I'm working with about 10 startups. And they're all in different fields. They tend to be clustered in finance. I have a few. I have some in sort of artificial intelligence and technology. And I have one, I think I've got two in those kind of areas. In finance, my startups are mostly in the area of what I would call the supply chain of finance. How to improve the flow of working capital to companies. Actually, these are all in India. How to improve the flow of capital. And one startup, for example, has a whole system to connect vendors of large companies to the companies and the banking system. So the vendors are short of capital. For instance, we are working with a large e-commerce company. So the e-commerce company would like to help its vendors. They're asking the vendors to supply more, but the vendors are not able to supply, right? Because they don't have money to buy new things. So the banks are not willing to give them money because they don't have any assets. These are small vendors. So the bank, through the e-commerce firm, lends, and on our platform, they lend to these vendors short-term finance. So they can buy their materials and prepare things. And when the bills are paid, they pay the bank. So that's the system. And all these people meet on our platform, on this firm's platform. So we have done this. We are working with a pharmaceutical company. We're working with the e-commerce company. We are now going to work with a steel company. And we actually have working with a chemicals company. So all of these things are happening. And the founders are all in their late 20s. In fact, two of them are graduates of the IIT system, not IIT Madras, other IITs. And very enthusiastic, very hardworking. That's one example. Another example, I'm working with somebody in Silicon Valley who is actually the son of one of my IIT classmates. He's doing something in robotics. He's come up with a robotized wheelchair, a wheelchair that you can use in the airports, where when you get off the plane, instead of waiting for this rickety wheelchair that you have in airports, you have a robotized one where you sit there and it'll take you to the baggage claim area, and which is a fun. He's testing it right now in San Francisco Airport and San Jose Airport. And if it succeeds, I think it's a huge thing. I'm one of his advisors and early investors. So these are two examples, I think, that should give you an idea of what I do. Yeah.